So I recently learned how to play chess. Yes, I know I'm about a decade late. However, when I first started playing, I severely underestimated the intellect and forethought required. As in order to win, you have to think 10 steps ahead at all times. I would just move random pieces, not thinking about how each move would affect the next, how it would affect my opponent, and what my opponent's best response would be. This, as you can probably tell, was not a very good strategy, and I became acquainted with the term checkmate quite well. Now, why is all this relevant? Well, the theme of the conference is back to square one, and I had to go back to square one, both literally and figuratively, on the chessboard and with my strategies. Now, life is much like a game of chess. It's full of strategy, probability, and decision making. And if we ever want to progress, we have to learn from our past mistakes and calculate the payoffs of all outcomes in the future, choosing the best one. This is where the concept of game theory comes in. Professor Robert Aumann defined it as the mathematical formalization of interactive decision making. Now, obviously, that's quite a mouthful. So let's just look at what a game is. A game is any interaction between multiple people in which each person's payoffs depends on the other. The question is, can game theory really help us improve the way we make decisions? Some experts believe that it comes pretty close to reality, while others believe that it's just what the name suggests, theory. What do I think? I think that it's somewhere in between. However, I'll leave it up to you to decide exactly where. Just about everything we do in life is a game in the game theory sense. Don't believe me? Well, by attending this conference itself, you've been playing a game. You decided to spend your morning exposing yourselves to new insights and ideas, and this hopefully had a great payoff for you. Now, your decision also resulted in a greater payoff for the TEDx team and I, as it meant a greater validation for our hard work. This is an example of a positive sum game, where all players are better off. Different to this is a zero-sum game. This is where the losses and gains of each player are exactly balanced by the losses and gains of other players. In short, there is one winner and one loser. For example, like in chess or rock, paper, scissors. Now, many people often consider life to be a zero-sum game. And this leads to them thinking that everything is a competition. However, playing to win does not always mean that someone else has to lose. In fact, in the real world, zero-sum games are often just theoretical because nothing happens in a vacuum, and it's very possible for all agents to come out better off. Now, I'd like to go back to the example I said earlier about rock, paper, scissors. I'm sure all of you have played it before. Now, it's interesting to think about what goes on in our heads when we're making our decision. We're making our decision based on what we think the other player is going to play. This is called interdependency, and I'd like to demonstrate this using a game. I'd like to call upon 3 members from the audience. Yes. Okay, you may all now come up. So as you can see on the slides here, the premise of the game is for each of the volunteers to choose a number from 1 to 100. And the winner is the one who chooses 2/3 of the average of the 3 choices. So this requires a lot of interdependency, as each player has to think about what the other players are going to guess and try to find what the 2/3 of the average would be. Now, I'm sure you've all had time to figure out your numbers. So please let me know what each of your numbers are. 34. 56. 76. Great, thank you. So your total is 166. Divided by 3 would give you an average of 55.33. And then if you times that by 2/3, you would get 36.52. As you can see, 34 was the closest answer. Congratulations. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a prize for you, but I hope that this demonstrated the concept of strategic thinking quite well and forced you to use your brain to figure out what interdependency really is and maybe even relate it to how we use it in everyday life. Because As I said before, nothing happens in a vacuum, and all of our decisions are interdependent. Thank you, guys. Let me explain the rationale of the game. The highest each player can choose is 100. Hence, the highest average can be 100. Thus, the highest 2/3 would be 67. Now, thus it's not logical to guess above 67. If you've come to that conclusion, you can guess that all other players have 2. And if everyone guesses 67, your best interest would be to guess 2/3 of 67. This goes on, kind of like Inception, where the numbers get smaller and smaller until all players announce 1. This is a Nash equilibrium, which is defined when there is no incentive to deviate from it. And the reason there is no incentive to deviate is because when you assume all players are rational and everyone guesses 1, you won't get a higher payoff by guessing any number other than 1. The game which I played just now with the volunteers was an example of a one-time game. When it's repeated, you would see that the numbers get smaller and smaller as they understand the logic of the game better. It's common that the outcome is different of repeated and non-repeated games. For example, how many of you have embarrassed yourselves in public with your friends and your first thought was, they don't know us, they'll never see us again, so it doesn't matter. If you thought that, then you're completely right. It is a non-repeated game, and thus any negative payoff you receive in the short run will not matter, as you're not going to interact with those players again. Another key concept that I wanted to discuss is that of cooperation. Now, I'd like to share with you all a personal experience I had at a Model UN conference. This is a simulation of the United Nations where students represent countries with the aim of passing resolutions to solve global or national issues, and you need a certain number of signatures to pass a resolution. For my second ever conference, I faced what is known as an infamous power delegate. I usually characterize them as obnoxious, egotistical, and they usually want to control the council. So let's call him Chad. Chad did not talk or interact with any of the other quiet or smaller nations unless he needed signatures for his resolution. This I would not call diplomatic or cooperative. So I decided to figure out my strategy, because being Iraq in a Human Rights Council, a position many people don't see as favorable, I decided that based on my previous readings in game theory, I would follow the strategy of cooperation. During lobbying sessions, I went up to each delegate and asked them what their nation's interests were. And after a while of this, at the end, 2 resolutions were written, and 1 was passed. Mine, which was overwhelmingly voted for over Chad's. Now, I'm sure you all can figure out why. And this is very common, as cooperation, I've been to many conferences as a delegate and a chair, and I've almost always seen that delegates who cooperate receive a higher payoff. And this can be seen in daily life as well. In fact, I think it's really a mathematician, Haim Shapira, said it best, that egotistical behavior is not only morally problematic, but strategically unwise. While we're on the topic of optimal strategies, let's see how we can apply strategic thinking to college applications. Many, usually American ones, offer early application, and acceptance rates are usually higher. So because you can only apply to one school, you have to choose. Should I apply to my extremely competitive dream school or to a more feasible match school? Up here, we see a game tree demonstrating the payoffs for the situation as well as the reasons for the values. My friend Neha helped me make this game tree. What conclusions can we draw from this? Well, it's pretty clear that using rational thinking, your safest option would be to apply to your match school early and have a higher chance of getting accepted, thus going to college, which would make you happy and your parents happy. However, this talk isn't called play to lose, or this talk isn't called play not to lose. It's called play to win. And in this case, the most rational strategy may not be the most optimal one for you, because early decision acceptance rates are significantly higher compared to normal. For example, the University of Pennsylvania, their normal acceptance rates are around 5 to 6%, whereas their early decision rates can be even up to 17%. Thus, your best chance of getting into your dream school would be to apply early. Now, a disclaimer here is that this is a very simplified version of the college admissions process, and the numerical payoffs given here would differ from student to student and college to college. However, the main principle of strategic thinking still applies, and I highly encourage all of you to consider these factors, and even if you're not going to make a game tree like I did, this could prove very useful in helping you decide between early applications or even maybe between which colleges you want to apply to. Now from my talk, you can see I've talked a lot about maximizing one's own gain or self-interest. And after all, because when we play to win, right? All this talk about selfishness has led me to the dark side of game theory, or it's also known as Homo economicus, the economic man philosophy from the 19th century. I think it's best summed up with this quote from the Joker. Their morals, their code. It's a bad joke. You'll see. I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve. We see this now more than ever. Just look at how we've reacted to this pandemic. The chips were down and we were at each other's throats. The toilet paper shortage, the anti-lockdown protests, and right here in Singapore itself, the irrational stockpiling. We wanted to maximize our self-interest, but we lost sight of common shared goals. This is one reason we need to go back to square one. We need to prove that selflessness and altruism really do exist. In fact, there is an interesting term called egoistic altruism, which relates back to the positive sum theory, where if we all work together and cooperate, we can achieve our own goals as well as bring everyone up, just like Akshita was saying in her previous speech. Now, we must also consider that while we're always consumed by events at the macro scale, some of the most important decisions we make are on a personal level. If you're not constructing game trees for every decision you make in life, I urge you to ask yourself these questions when you're making any important decision. Are the other players rational? How will others' actions influence yours? Do you have all the information you need to make an informed decision? And is it a repeated or non-repeated game? Lastly, will cooperation result in a greater payoff? To conclude, I'm going to leave you with an analogy. Life is a board game, and the winners are usually the ones who know how to play. Don't repeat my mistake and play the game without knowing the rules. Sometimes winning also means taking a step back or cooperating, because what's the point in moving 2 steps forward if in the end, the board beneath you starts crumbling? Thank you.